They say every piece of land has a story, but mine turned into a battleground. Not with nature, but with people. The kind who smile to your face while drawing maps over your backyard. I never asked for a fight. All I wanted was peace, a quiet morning with my coffee and crops. But the moment their tires touched my soil, something in me snapped. This wasn't just about parking. This was about pride, about legacy, about a man's right to stand his ground when no one else will. They thought I was just a stubborn farmer on the edge of town. They didn't know I held the power, literally. And when the dust settled, well, let's just say not all wars are fought with guns. Some are won with roots, resolve, and a perfectly timed power outage. Cue dramatic pause as title fades in. The screen door slammed behind Ethan McAllister as he stormed into his house, boots still muddy from the fields crushed under strangers' tires. His hands trembled as he opened the drawer in the old oak desk his grandfather had once kept immaculate. Inside, a faded manila envelope labeled Deeds and Records Miller Farm in his grandfather's shaky cursive. He grabbed it and headed straight to his truck. The county records office in Ridgeview Pines was quiet, save for the ticking of a wall clock and the low hum of a printer. A woman behind the front counter looked up as Ethan entered, holding the envelope tight under his arm. "I'm looking for Frank Jenkins," he said, voice firm. A few minutes later, a stooped man with sharp blue eyes and a bolo tie stepped out from a back office. "Ethan McAllister?" he asked, squinting. "You're Hank's grandson." "Yes, sir," Ethan replied. "And I need your help." Frank motioned him back through a narrow hallway into a room lined with steel filing cabinets. "Your grandpa was stubborn but sharp. Never let folks push him around." "What's this about?" Ethan explained everything. The cars, the HOA claims, the forged easement. Frank listened, nodding slowly, then pulled a set of keys from his belt and unlocked a cabinet labeled M.R. Miller, Rowan. 20 minutes passed in tense silence, paper rustling, files opening and closing. Finally, Frank placed 3 yellowing pages on the table and tapped the top one with a pen. "Here's your original property deed, clean. No easements, no exceptions. The Miller farm was never part of Evergreen Meadows, and there's no legal record of any shared use or agreement for parking." Ethan exhaled slowly. It was validation, but something was still nagging at him. "Is there anything else? Maybe from the utility companies?" Frank raised a brow. "You mean the transformer? Your grandpa was shrewd about that one." He pulled out a separate binder, flipped through records, and pointed to a notarized document dated 1993. "Here. Your grandfather allowed Pine Ridge Electric to install a primary transformer on the northwest edge of the farm. In exchange, the company paid him a small annual stipend and agreed the equipment would remain under his, now your, private property easement." Ethan leaned in. "That transformer, it still powers the Evergreen Meadows subdivision, doesn't it?" Frank chuckled. "Every single house in it. Without access through your land, they'd need to reroute the entire grid. Cost 'em 6 figures and months of permitting." Ethan sat back in stunned silence. He hadn't just inherited farmland. He'd inherited leverage. "I haven't received a single payment," he muttered. Frank nodded. "Those checks are still going to the trust your grandpa set up. Since it was never updated after his death, they've just been piling up. You'll want to contact Pine Ridge Electric and fix that." By the time Ethan walked out of the records office with a full folder in his hand and a copy of the transformer easement under his arm, a shift had occurred. They wanted to muscle him out, claim his land. They had no idea he controlled the switch to everything they relied on. He got into his truck, dialed Pine Ridge Electric, and said calmly, "This is Ethan McAllister. I own the land under your E173 transformer. We need to talk, today." As the engine roared to life and dust kicked up behind him, Ethan was no longer just defending his land. He was preparing to go on the offensive. Ethan didn't sleep that night. After the call with Pine Ridge Electric confirmed his legal right to restrict access to the transformer, a sense of grim resolve settled over him. He wasn't someone who liked conflict, but they'd forced his hand. The next morning, Ethan stood in his driveway watching a line of HOA board members strut toward his porch like they owned the place. Margaret Whitfield led the charge, flanked by HOA attorney Charles Granger and Councilman Vernon Clark. Behind them trailed a silent, clipboard-carrying assistant whose heels stabbed the earth like accusations. Margaret smiled, her lips tight. "Mr. McAllister, we're here to offer a reasonable compromise." "I'll stop you right there," Ethan said, stepping off the porch and holding up a manila folder. "There is no easement, no legal precedent, and no compromise." Charles cleared his throat. "According to our archives, your grandfather granted informal usage of the East Field for overflow parking. These things don't always require paperwork." Ethan's laugh was sharp. "You mean the archives that include a fake HOA agreement signed by my dead grandfather? The one your office supposedly found last week?" Vernon shifted uncomfortably, but Margaret pressed on. "Let's not turn this into a spectacle, Mr. McAllister. This neighborhood depends on harmony. If you continue to escalate—" "I'm not the one who cut my own fence at 4 a.m, Ethan snapped. "Nor did I authorize parking on my land, damage to my crops, or the illegal use of falsified documentation." "You're overreacting," Margaret said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your field is unused most of the year. We're offering your community a chance to participate in something bigger than a few rows of tomatoes." Ethan stepped closer. "I've lived here my whole life. This isn't just dirt to me, this is family. You want a parking lot? Buy your own land. And as for your transformer, I'm officially restricting non-emergency access. If you want maintenance, you'll go through me." Charles interjected quickly. "That's a violation of the utilities operational easement." "No," Ethan said, pulling a letter from Pine Ridge Electric from his folder. "I just got this confirmation from their legal department. As the landowner, I have a right to control access, so long as I don't interfere with emergency service or cause outages." They agree. And now they're installing motion-triggered cameras near the transformer. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "This is your hill to die on, then?" "No," Ethan replied coldly. "But it's where your bluff ends." They left without another word, and for a moment, Ethan thought they might back down. But 2 days later, retaliation began. He received a letter taped to his mailbox, an official violation notice from the Evergreen Meadows HOA, citing him for visual obstruction and unapproved agricultural activity. The fine? $3,500. The letter was filled with language suggesting his barn, fencing, and tractor were incompatible with the community aesthetic. He wasn't even in the community. The next day, the sheriff showed up. Someone had filed a noise complaint from early morning tractor use. Another had accused Ethan of illegally dumping soil into a protected drainage ditch. All of it false. And then came the worst of it. Margaret's husband, a contractor with ties to the local zoning board, filed a petition to have Ethan's property reclassified as residential mixed use, which could open the door to condemnation if Ethan refused to cooperate. They were trying to outflank him, bleed him, break him. He sat on his porch that night, staring at the transformer, blinking quietly at the back of his field. The stars overhead silent witnesses. "This ain't just war," he muttered. "This is sabotage." But Ethan wasn't alone anymore. Elena, his neighbor, had quietly passed him a USB stick with leaked HOA board emails she'd intercepted, discussing fake easements, legal traps, and how to apply pressure until he sells. It was time to bring in the cavalry. Ethan called his lawyer, Oliver Jenkins. "They're moving fast," Ethan said. "Too fast." Oliver replied calmly. "Then we file faster. Injunctions, complaints, press. We hit back twice as hard." Ethan stood, the wind ruffling the worn brim of his father's old hat. "All right then," he said. "Let's turn the lights on." By the time the injunction paperwork was filed, Ethan was already 3 steps ahead. He didn't just want the HOA to back off. He wanted every neighbor, official, and bystander to know exactly what had been happening behind the white picket lies of Evergreen Meadows. The first move? He called in the media. With Oliver Jenkins' help, Ethan arranged an interview with Channel 9 News. The story aired that same weekend. Small-town farmer battles HOA over illegal land grab and forged documents. The footage showed drone shots of his flattened tomato fields, the damaged fence, the transformer station glowing at the edge of his land like a ticking time bomb. It showed the forged easement. It showed Margaret Whitfield's signature on HOA letters, targeting him with unjust fines. And it showed Ethan, standing in front of his barn, calm but firm. "This land's been in my family for 73 years, he said on camera. They thought I'd fold like cheap paper. They thought they could bury me under fines and bureaucracy. But I read every line of my deed. I know what my rights are. And now, so does everyone else." By Monday morning, the phone in the HOA office wouldn't stop ringing. Residents were furious. One woman cornered Margaret in the grocery store and accused her of wasting dues on personal vendettas. Others emailed the board demanding transparency. Some even offered to testify on Ethan's behalf. But Ethan wasn't done. He knew he couldn't win this war with just sympathy and news cameras. He needed legal teeth. So, with Oliver's help, Ethan filed a cease and desist order against the HOA for unauthorized use of his land. A defamation complaint regarding the forged signature attributed to his grandfather. A civil suit for damages to his crops and emotional distress due to targeted harassment. But it was the next move that hit Margaret hardest. Ethan contacted Pine Ridge Electric and exercised his right under the easement to restrict all non-essential access to the transformer station. It didn't cut the power, but it meant that any future repairs would require at least 48 hours' notice and his written approval. Suddenly, the HOA had a serious liability on their hands. If anything went wrong with the grid, if one transformer blew or there was an outage, they'd be the ones blamed for delaying repairs due to their illegal usage of Ethan's land. The HOA board held a closed-door emergency meeting. Rumors flew. Then came a subtle but telling change. The fake fines stopped. The cars disappeared. A landscaper came to inspect the damage on Ethan's fields, and a formal offer to negotiate arrived in his mailbox. Unsigned, but clearly a panic response. Still, Ethan didn't flinch. He was planting new tomatoes by hand when Margaret showed up again. Not with her usual entourage. This time, she came alone. "I assume you've seen the news," she said, crossing her arms. Ethan didn't look up. "Sure have. Great lighting on that drone footage." "You've made your point. The board is reconsidering." "I'm not here for reconsideration," Ethan said, stabbing a trowel into the dirt. "I want written apologies, full compensation, and public acknowledgement that your board acted without legal basis. No more vague offers, no more stalling." Margaret's nostrils flared. "You think you can embarrass me into surrender?" "I think you embarrassed yourself," Ethan replied. "All I did was tell the truth." She turned to leave, heels crunching the gravel beneath her rage. Just then, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was Elena. "They're planning something for the next meeting," she whispered. "A vote to fast-track a proposal that would strip your property of special zoning protections. If it passes, they could refile for easement under community necessity." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "They're really gonna try one last power play," he muttered. "Then it's time I take the whole system down." And just like that, the final phase had begun. The day of the emergency HOA assembly arrived like a brewing thunderstorm. Thick air, rising pressure, and everyone waiting for lightning to strike. Ethan showed up 10 minutes early, dressed simply in jeans and a button-down shirt, holding a black folder under his arm. No lawyers this time. No press. Just him. Inside the community center, the air was electric. Neighbors filled the rows, whispering nervously. Some avoided Ethan's eyes. Others gave him short nods. Elena sat near the front, her lips tight with anticipation. At the front of the room sat the HOA board. Margaret Whitfield, flanked by Jeffrey the attorney, and 2 other board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Behind them was a large projector screen and a podium with a mic. Margaret tapped the mic. Let's begin, she said. This is an internal matter. Only residents of Evergreen Meadows may vote. We're here to resolve Mr. Davis's recent objections. Ethan stood. You mean your attempt to illegally seize and reclassify private farmland? He said, clear and calm. Let's use the right words. A few people in the crowd chuckled. This is a private meeting, Jeffrey said quickly. If you're not a resident, I'm the landowner being discussed, Ethan cut in, and I've been invited by at least a dozen members who want transparency. He turned to the crowd. Raise your hand if you want to hear the truth. More than half the room raised their hands. Margaret's jaw clenched. 2 minutes, she snapped. Then we move to vote. Ethan stepped forward, pulled a USB drive from his folder, and handed it to the tech guy running the projector. Slide 1 appeared, a high-resolution image of the property deed and survey map, clearly marked Davis land, not under HOA jurisdiction. Slide 2, the forged easement, dated 6 months ago, with his grandfather's alleged signature. My grandfather died 3 years ago, Ethan said. This is a forgery, and I have handwriting samples to prove it. Gasps rippled through the room. Slide 3, screenshots of emails leaked by Elena, Margaret and Jeffrey discussing turning up the heat on Ethan, pressuring him until he breaks, and even a plan B to rezone the land forcibly. Slide 4, surveillance photos of a man in HOA uniform cutting through Ethan's fence at 4:35 a.m., identified by his security footage, date-stamped, time-stamped. And just so you know, Ethan said, holding up the printed police report, that little stunt was submitted as criminal evidence. Trespassing, vandalism, tampering with critical infrastructure. The room exploded. People shouted over each other. You forged his deed? Did you approve $30K for lawyers without telling us? You tried to rezone a working farm for parking spaces? Margaret banged her gavel. Order! This is slander. No, this is proof, Ethan said. He turned to the projector operator. Play the video. The clip rolled. Margaret arriving at the transformer station, speaking to someone off camera, then fumbling with the access panel before fleeing. Seconds later, police lights flashed. A silence fell so deep, it was deafening. Margaret Whitfield, Ethan said, voice steady. You tried to frame me. You violated my land. You endangered your own neighbors by tampering with the electrical supply. And you thought no one would stand up to you. He turned to the crowd. I'm not the only one you've bullied, and I won't be the last. Unless someone stops you. An older gentleman in the front row stood. I move to suspend the entire HOA board, pending full investigation. A murmur of support surged through the crowd. Seconded, someone called from the back. Margaret looked ready to burst. You can't do this. I am Evergreen Meadows. No, Elena said softly, standing beside Ethan. You're the reason it's falling apart. The vote was swift, overwhelming. Every hand but 2 went up. The gavel fell. Margaret stood in shock, frozen in place. Jeffrey gathered his notes quickly and left without a word. As the room began to clear, neighbors approached Ethan, offering apologies, handshakes, and thanks. Thomas, a retired judge, stepped forward. Mr. Davis, the board may be gone, but the damage they did isn't. We'd like to help restore your land. Volunteer work, donations, whatever it takes. Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity. I'd appreciate that. Thomas smiled. Let's make this community something worth being proud of. For all of us. Outside, the sun was setting over the edge of Ethan's property, washing the fields in gold. The battle wasn't over. Not yet. There'd be court dates, repairs, maybe even appeals. But something fundamental had shifted. Power had returned to where it belonged. Not in the hands of the entitled, but in the hands of those who respected the land, the law, and each other. Ethan looked out over his soil, damaged, but still his, and smiled. Tomorrow, they would start rebuilding. Together. Ethan stood by the fence line early the next morning, hot coffee in hand, boots coated in dew. The sky above Evergreen, Colorado, was painted in soft pastels, a gentle contrast to the firestorm of events that had swept through the neighborhood like a prairie blaze. But for the first time in weeks, there was no tension in the air, just quiet, healing. He took a sip and watched as neighbors trickled onto his land. Not to park, not to argue, but to help. Thomas arrived first with a pair of work gloves and a rented rototiller. "We're restoring your east field," he said without preamble. "The HOA board may be gone, but the mess they left is ours to clean." Behind him, Elena showed up with seedlings from her own garden. The Henderson twins brought paint for the fence. Even kids were picking up trash, giggling as they competed to fill their bags. Ethan hadn't asked for any of this. He hadn't expected it. But there they were, dozens of neighbors who had once looked the other way, now standing beside him, sleeves rolled up, ready to dig in. He felt something tighten in his throat and turned away, pretending to inspect the soil. By noon, the east field looked transformed. Flattened tire ruts filled in, tomato beds replanted. A new layer of mulch spread evenly. The scorched corner from the illegal parking had been resodded. The fence was upright again. At one point, a little girl approached Ethan holding a crayon drawing. It showed a barn, a field, and the words, "Farmer Ethan saves the day," in shaky bubble letters. He laughed, blinking hard. "Thanks, kiddo. That's going on my fridge." In the days that followed, the ripple effects of the HOA's collapse spread fast. The local news aired a full segment titled, "Farm versus HOA, How One Landowner Stood His Ground." Ethan had refused interviews, but footage of Margaret being escorted from the emergency meeting, her carefully styled hair in disarray, was replayed across the state. Jeffrey, the attorney, resigned from his firm amid an ethics review. Margaret, facing civil charges and a police investigation for tampering with utility infrastructure, put her house up for sale. Rumors said she left town before the court date, possibly heading to Arizona to stay with family. Ethan didn't care. She was gone. What mattered was what remained. With guidance from Oliver Jenkins, Ethan finalized a formal boundary agreement with the city. His land was declared legally independent from Evergreen Meadows, no longer susceptible to annexation, zoning tricks, or HOA overreach. Pinewood Electric installed a reinforced access gate around the transformer and began monthly inspections, only by appointment and always accompanied by Ethan or a deputy. No more surprise visitors. But perhaps the biggest change was within the neighborhood itself. Thomas was elected interim HOA president, but instead of operating behind closed doors, he dissolved most of the old rules. "No more nonsense about mailbox paint shades or grass length," he declared. "We're neighbors, not a regime." A few people complained. Most cheered. Ethan was invited to speak at the next town hall, not as a victim, but as an example. He stepped to the podium and cleared his throat. "I never wanted a fight," he began, voice low but steady. "But when someone tries to take what your family spent generations building, you don't walk away. You stand, and when you do, you find out who's standing with you." Applause filled the room. Later that evening, Ethan sat alone on his porch, the soft chirp of crickets returning to the night. Rusty, his old farm dog, curled up at his feet. He looked out at the freshly tilled soil and the lights of the neighborhood in the distance, still glowing thanks to a transformer placed decades ago by his grandfather, on land that was still theirs, his. The fight had cost him time, energy, and peace. But in the end, it gave him something more: respect, community, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that justice, no matter how long it takes, still finds a way. He raised his coffee cup toward the stars. "To you, Grandpa," he whispered. "Still got your back." And with that, he leaned back, exhaled deeply, and finally rested.